For 80 years, the world has believed a comforting story, that in the Second World War, Switzerland simply stood aside, small, neutral, and safe. The truth is far stranger and far more ruthless. Beneath those postcard mountains, the Swiss had built a machine designed to make their own country not worth conquering. Every great tunnel, every bridge, every Alpine pass had been packed with explosives, ready, at a single order, to be blown into rubble. This was neutrality with a detonator in its hand. Chapter 1. Surrounded. In June 1940, France collapsed in 6 weeks. Almost overnight, the map of Europe turned black, and a small democracy in the middle of it looked up to find itself completely encircled by the Axis: Nazi Germany to the north and east, Fascist Italy to the south, and conquered France to the west. Switzerland was now an island of democracy in a fascist sea, surrounded on every side. Its 4 million people knew exactly what had happened to Poland, to Belgium, to France. The only question was whether they would be next, and what, if anything, they could do about it. The Swiss had 3 choices, and 2 of them were unthinkable. They could surrender without a fight and become a vassal of the Reich. They could defend their borders in the open and be annihilated in a week. Or they could find a third way, one that turned their greatest weakness into a weapon. Switzerland had something Hitler wanted very badly: the Alps themselves. Straight through those mountains ran the great rail tunnels, above all the Gotthard, the vital artery linking Germany to its ally Italy. Whoever held those tunnels held the crossroads of Europe. Chapter 2. A nation in arms. Swiss neutrality was never passive. For centuries, every able-bodied man had been a trained soldier who kept his rifle at home. When war came, the country could put a militia army of over 400,000 men into the field within days, one of the highest rates of mobilization on earth. This was a country of riflemen. Marksmanship was a national sport. The army rifle hung in the hallway of ordinary homes. There was no clean line between soldier and citizen, and that meant an invader would not just fight an army. He would fight a whole people. To lead them, the Swiss parliament elected a single commander-in-chief, a title only ever granted in time of danger. His name was Henry Guisan, a farmer and career officer, and he would become the face of Swiss defiance. But Guisan faced a brutal geography. 2/3 of the Swiss people, and nearly all of its industry, lay crammed into the flat central lowlands, a perfect tank country, impossible to hold against a modern blitzkrieg. Defend the border, and the army would be destroyed in a week. To make the plan work, Guisan had to contemplate the unspeakable, writing off Zurich, Basel, Bern, and Geneva. The very cities the army existed to protect would be surrendered, so that the army could survive to fight from the peaks. It was defense by amputation. Chapter 3. The Redoubt. So Guisan chose a strategy that was as ruthless as it was brilliant. If the lowlands could not be held, then the army would not die defending them. It would abandon them, the cities, the factories, most of the population, and withdraw into a fortress that no army on earth could crack. The Alps themselves, they called it the National Redoubt. The entire field army would fall back into a fortified triangle deep in the mountains, anchored on the fortresses of Sargans in the east, Saint-Maurice in the west, and the Gotthard Massif at the heart. It was a strategy that accepted the unthinkable. The economic heart of the nation, and much of its own people, would be left exposed to occupation. Guisan was betting that a Switzerland which could not be usefully conquered would never be conquered at all. Chapter 4. The Oath on the Rütli. To announce it, Guisan chose not a barracks or a parliament, but a meadow. On the 25th of July, 1940, he summoned the senior officers of his army to the Rütli, the small Alpine field where, legend says, the Swiss Confederation had been founded 7 centuries before. There, on the ground of the nation's birth, he told them the plan. They would fight from the mountains and they would not surrender. It was theater, and it was deadly serious, a deliberate act to weld an anxious country into a single, unbending will to resist. Chapter 5. The Labyrinth. And then they built. Into the living rock of the mountains, Swiss engineers carved a hidden world, kilometers of tunnels, barracks, hospitals, and command posts, buried beneath thousands of feet of granite, all but invisible from the outside. Heavy artillery was mounted deep inside the peaks, firing through slits disguised as cracks in the cliff face, covering every road and valley that led into the redoubt. A soldier could stand at the foot of the mountain and never know that a fortress and its guns were watching him. The scale was staggering. Hundreds of fortified works, thousands of bunkers, hundreds of kilometers of tunnels, built by soldiers and workers laboring in shifts around the clock, often in total secrecy. An entire mountain range was being quietly turned into a fortress. At Sargans, at Saint-Maurice in the Gotthard, great fortress complexes anchored the corners of the triangle, linked by thousands of smaller bunkers and machine gun nests scattered across the slopes. It was a brutalist labyrinth designed for one purpose: to make the mountains a meat grinder. Any invader would have to fight uphill, in the snow and the fog, through interlocking fields of fire, against a defender who knew every rock, while his supply lines stretched back through valleys that could be sealed with a single explosion. The Alps would bleed the Wehrmacht white. Chapter 6. The Doomsday Switch. But the true genius of the redoubt was not the guns. It was the demolitions. The Swiss understood that their country was valuable to the Axis only as a working corridor, and so they prepared to destroy that corridor utterly. Demolition teams were stationed at every key point, living beside their charges, drilling for a single moment. If the invasion came, the order would run down the line, and in a matter of minutes the crossroads of Europe would cease to exist. The switch was always within reach. The great Gotthard and Simplon rail tunnels, the very reason to invade, were packed with explosives, rigged to collapse. Bridges over gorges, roads carved into cliffs, the Alpine passes themselves. All of it wired, all of it ready to vanish in a matter of seconds. Through the Gotthard flowed the lifeblood of the Axis war economy: German coal south to Italy, Italian goods north to the Reich. Cut that artery, and you did not just hurt Switzerland. You struck at the war machine of two fascist powers at once. This was the trap. Germany could pour an army into Switzerland and, at enormous cost, perhaps even take the mountains. But the moment it did, the tunnels would be gone. The invader would win a wrecked, useless fortress, any victory purely Pyrrhic. Chapter 7. The Line Across the Land. The mountains were the last redoubt, but the Swiss did not give up the lowlands without preparing them too. Across the likely paths of invasion, they laid down long lines of concrete anti-tank blocks, marching over the fields like the teeth of some giant. The soldiers nicknamed them Toblerones, after the country's famous triangular chocolate. Whimsical name, grim purpose: to channel and stall German armor, to buy the field army the hours it needed to fall back into the mountains and pull the switch. Behind the barriers, the whole army rehearsed its terrible ballet. How, on the day of invasion, it would fight a delaying action, then melt away from the lowlands and vanish into the redoubt, leaving the enemy an empty, booby-trapped heartland and a fortress that would not fall. Chapter 8. The Invasion That Never Came. The Germans did draw up the plans. Operation Tannenbaum, a lightning conquest of Switzerland. Staff officers wargamed it again and again. And again they came back with the same uncomfortable answer: it would cost far too much for far too little. Why spend divisions and months and blood to seize a broken mountain corridor, when the same Switzerland, left neutral, would quietly let non-military goods pass through its tunnels and trade with the Reich anyway? The redoubt had done its job. It made the sober, brutal arithmetic of invasion simply not add up, and the Swiss showed they meant it. When German aircraft strayed into their skies, Swiss fighters shot them down, infuriating Berlin, which raged and threatened. But every incident sent the same message: this small country would defend its neutrality with live ammunition. And here is the part the legend leaves out. Switzerland also bargained, trading goods, credit, and gold with Nazi Germany, and allowing sealed trains through its tunnels. Its neutrality was armed but also pragmatic, and at times deeply compromised. Historians still argue about what truly kept the Germans out, the fortress in the Alps, or the deals struck in the banks. The honest answer is probably both. A country too costly to take by force, and too useful to bother taking at all. Deterrence and compromise, tangled together. Chapter 9. The Price of Survival. So the comfortable image of a peaceful, passive Switzerland dissolves. What is left is something harder and more interesting. A small nation that armed itself to the teeth, prepared to burn its own crossroads to the ground, and gambled its survival on making itself more trouble than it was worth. The Redoubt outlived the war. Through the long decades of the Cold War, the Swiss kept building deeper bunkers, bigger guns. Only recently have the great fortresses fallen silent, their steel doors opened at last to tourists. It was a strategy built on a cold and very Swiss piece of wisdom, that the surest way to avoid a war is to convince your enemy that winning it will cost him everything and gain him nothing at all. Neutral, yes, but never passive and never quite as innocent as the postcards suggest. This has been WeThoth. If this story made you see a familiar place with new eyes, subscribe, and we will meet again at the next hidden corner of history.